Good evening, everyone. I'm Khalil, manager with Battle River Research Group. Welcome to the webinar. So today our speaker is Barry Yaremcio. He is well known throughout the province. He is not new like me. So Barry was raised on a mixed farm in northeastern Alberta. He worked with Alberta Agriculture as a district agriculturist. Then he worked with the industry a bit. Then he came back and worked with the province as a beef and forage specialist. So last year he started his own consultancy company, Yaremcio Egg Consulting. Welcome, Barry. Please start your webinar.
Thank you, Khalil. Much appreciated. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time out this evening and joining the webinar. As we're going through the webinar, if you've got a question or if you type in a question, Khalil will go ahead and let me know that there's something there. He will bring the question forward as we're going, and I think that's probably a good way to do it, because if you try to save a question until the end, a lot of times it gets forgotten. And the nice thing with the anonymity with the webinar is you're not looking around the room to see who's watching you ask the question. But always remember, if you've got the question, 50% of the people on the webinar will have the same question. So don't be afraid to ask. So what I've been seeing this year for forage quality is the results are extremely variable. We've got some that is really good protein levels, high energy. Other is low quality, low protein. But most areas of the province, there's an overabundance or a good quantity of hay available. Now, with the higher rainfall that we had early in the growing season, that will impact both the mineral and trace mineral levels in that forage. You'll get a dilution effect because of the massive amount of growth. And the other thing that happens is phosphorus is absorbed by the plant the first 3 weeks of the growing season. And last year it was cool and cloudy and very wet, which inhibits the release of phosphorus from the soil. So a lot of forages I'm seeing are low in phosphorus this year. So the concerns with what we've seen this year is forage testing is critical, even more so than in what we'd consider a more normal year. And if you've had hay left over from last year, or if you're going to have hay left over this spring to feed in the fall of 2021, that 2-year-old hay, all the vitamin precursors will be oxidized out, and there's nothing there to supply them to the cow. So once you start feeding the 2-year-old hay, you have to start feeding vitamins. Feed testing is important. I'm not sure if it matters if it's green feed or silage bales or hay or straw. Use a core sampling tool. And if you're working with a silage situation with a probe, if you can get that 6-foot probe into the packed silage without breaking a big sweat, you're a better man than I am, because I cheat. I use one that's run on a drill, and it makes it a lot easier. But it's critical to do the testing. Use the core sampling tools and get the samples in. Silage samples, you need to freeze. Take basically a half a bread bag full or a half a Ziploc bag full, a larger one. Take half of enough material out of the pail or whatever you collected it in. Squeeze it tight, seal the bag, and throw it into the freezer, and send the sample away frozen on a Monday or Tuesday, so it doesn't sit in a warm place over the weekend, either through a courier or Canada Post. So what do you want to test for? The basics, or the minimum that you need to look at, is moisture, protein, acid detergent fiber, which is used to produce a value for energy. Neutral detergent fiber is what we use to estimate what their total intake is going to be. Then your macro minerals: calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. So that's what's needed for balancing a ration, a basic ration. If you've had concerns with reproduction or animal health, Would definitely recommend doing the copper, manganese, and zinc as well. If you're in certain areas of the province, like Westlock Barhead, there's area there with high molybdenum levels, which ties up copper. And the other ones that you might want to consider is if you're using anything with a brassica or a forage mix with canola or rapeseed or a turnip, you should get the sulfates done. If there was a frost or a hailstorm, you need to look at nitrates. And then if it's been heat damaged, do an acid detergent in soluble nitrogen or ADIP. The reason that you want to use a core sampling tool is you can see on the top table there, comparing the grab versus the core sample. If you don't use a core sampling tool, a lot of the fine leaves and flowers that are present on a mixed hay basically drop onto the ground. So if you have pulled hay out of a bale in the middle of winter and there's snow on the ground, you can see all the fine leaves and everything there. It definitely reduces the protein and energy content in that feed. When it comes to the minerals and trace minerals, you need to work with the wet chemistry system rather than the NIR, because you can see there's a 300% difference between the calcium value from NIR and 0.16 for the wet chemistry. And wet chemistry is considered to be the most reliable method to do it. So do your samples with wet chemistry, pay a little bit more. It may take an extra day or two to get your results, but at least you know the answers are reliable. Now with forage quality and intake, I mentioned on the previous screen that neutral detergent fiber limits feed intake. And the rule of thumb that I use is they can eat 1.2% of their body weight in NDF on a daily basis. Now that's as long as their protein levels and protein and energy requirements are being met. If it's very poor quality forage without the extra protein, their intake will go down as well. Normal hay, any place from 45 to 55% NDF, and the weathered hay, more than 60 to 75%. So the weathered hay, 2-year-old hay can be, for energy-wise and intake-wise, can probably be no better than straw. You start seeing reductions in feed intake when the NDF value exceeds 60%. Nutrient requirements for a cow, mature cow, mid, late, and after calving, 7, 9, and 11% for protein, and energy 55, 60, and 65% TDN. For the calf, the growing calf, or even the replacement heifers, estimating the energy requirement is very dependent on what kind of gain you're expecting on the animal. Much different for a 1.5 pounds versus a 2.5 pound gain. But the one thing that does stay constant is protein intake. What I do there is I look at a 1,000-pound steer or a heifer. They need a 10% protein content in the ration. For every 100 pounds that weight is reduced, you increase your protein by 1%. So that 500-pound calf needs 15% protein overall in the ration, from the grain, from the milk, from the hay. So without the proper amount of protein in the growing animal's ration, they do not frame out, they do not stretch, they do not grow properly, and you end up with a calf that appears to be big-bellied and fat. Some people call them short, dumpy butterballs. So having the right amount of protein in there definitely makes a big difference on how those animals grow. So getting into the main portion of the presentation, we're going to look at fall management or weaning, how cow condition influences the nutrition program for the cow. How do you manage the bred heifer? How do you develop the calves? And how to make adjustments to the winter feeding program when you have problems with weather. And the last one that's not on there, I'll throw in as an extra, is evaluating the different types of minerals or tubs or products that are out there. Which of them are worth looking at, and which ones are basically materials that or types of products that you just want to stay away from. So if you're running into a situation, and I'm a little bit concerned about this for the upcoming year with the lack of snow, the lack of rainfall, and the dry soil conditions in many areas last fall, I don't know how much forage we're going to have on pasture. So if you run into a situation where you're running short of feed, the cows are starting to lose a little bit of weight, and you can see the calves are stalling out, you can wean them as early as 120 days of age. If you can, creep feed the calves prior to weaning so that they know what grain is before they're weaned, and have them adapt to the concentrates prior to that weaning stage. So that's one less stress they have to work with. So one of the things that they are now recommending is to go into a soft weaning or a two-stage weaning process. For the soft weaning, move the cows and calves into the pens where the calves are going to be after weaning. Leave them there for 4, 5, 6, 7 days. That way the cows will teach the calves where the water bowl is. They know where the feeder is, where the loafing areas are, where the salt trough is. And what you want to do is provide the calves with the ration that they're going to be receiving after the cows are pulled. So these lactating cows, if they're getting that little bit better ration for a few days, it's not going to hurt them. But that way they get adjusted to the taste or texture of the feed. If there's a medication needed or an ionophore added to the ration, you can do that. Start that program before the calves are weaned. And the vaccination boosters should be given 14 to 21 days after the first dose is received. You have to talk to your vet about what products and what the protocols are, because I don't get into the recommendations of what to use. The other one is using the nose clips. They call it two-stage weaning, where you place the paddle into the nose of the calf. When they try to suckle, what happens is the tab gets in the way and they can't put the teat into the mouth. Do this for about 4 to 7 days. You're feeding the calf high quality feeds. And again, let the cows and calves go into the weaning area so that they know what's going on. Stage 2, separate the calves from the cows, remove the nose tabs, and then just watch for illnesses. At this point, if you want to have the cows right across the fence in the next pen so that the calves can see the cows, generally that reduces stress as well. If anything, you would probably expect the cows to be bellowing more than the calves, because the calves have adjusted to not having milk, but the cows have got a full udder of milk and they want to get some relief. Looking at cow condition, if you've got a 1,450 pound cow or a 450 pound cows are the average weight for the herd, you'll probably find that 85 to 90% are in good condition and 15% are thin and could be as much as 150 pounds lighter than what they should be. And that's where the real advantage comes for early weaning. If you've got the ability to move some of these thin cows out into a separate pasture or a different pen, so they're separated from the main cow herd, wean that group and get those cows back into good shape prior to winter, it'll save you a lot of work. So comparing the two rations, you got to remember that a lactating cow has a 25% higher protein and energy requirement than a cow that is dry or pregnant and dry in mid-pregnancy, late pregnancy. So the good conditioning cow that you want to keep out with the calf and not wean them yet, a typical ration for them is about 32 pounds of hay, 5 pounds of grain, 1.25 ounces of salt, vitamins, and vitamin A, D, and E, and vitamin E. And that ration should get you roughly 0.6 pounds a day gain. Now, if you wean the cow and is in poor condition, the total number of pounds that you're feeding is less, but her demands are that much lower. So basically the grain and the minerals stay the same. They just can't eat as much hay. So feed the grain with the trace minerals and vitamins, and then let them free choice on the alfalfa grass hay, and that should work very well. If you're feeding the calf and cow separately, if you want that 500-pound calf to gain 2 pounds a day, 10 pounds of hay, 4 pounds of barley, again with the salt and the trace minerals. So if you'd consider feeding the cow and calf separately, you're going to need an additional 3 pounds a day more hay than the cow-calf pair together, additional 4 pounds of salt, 15 grams of, 4 pounds of barley, and then the additional number of grams of salt and vitamins. So the question will always come up, well, is it worth my while to do this? Am I not losing money by paying more for feed? So I put prices in when you're comparing this, the two rations, hay at 6 cents a pound and barley at 12 cents a pound, or about $6 a bushel right now. Your total cost is $2.54 for the lactating cow and calf, the pair together. The dry cow, you're a little bit less, but the cost of the barley and hay for the calf goes up. Therefore, your total cost per day is up about 83 cents per day. So if you're weaning a month earlier than what you normally would, it's going to cost you $25. Now, the one thing that will happen with calves or calves on a good quality weaning ration, they should be able to get 2 pounds a day gain compared to a calf on a thin cow that's not getting much milk on a poor quality pasture. You'll see a much different or a higher weaning weight from that calf. And then on the other side of the coin, a cow that is 200 pounds lighter than what she should be going into winter needs an extra 1,400 pounds of hay just to stay warm, not to gain weight. And at 6 cents a pound, that's $85. So that extra $25 you're spending on the extra feed will more than compensate for the extra hay that you'd need later in the year. The question comes along at minus 20, things are going along well. That's the lower critical temperature where the heat of fermentation from the cow digesting the feed will keep her warm. When you're looking at a cow that's thin versus one that's in good condition, how much extra grain do you need so that thin cow will gain a pound a day to make up the shortage before the cold weather hits? So at minus 20, your energy requirement is 31 megacals of DE compared to 35 for a cow that's thin. And to make up that differential, you need an extra 2.8 pounds of barley a day for that thin cow, just to stay warm. At minus 30, that's well below the lower critical temperature or lower critical temperature where they cannot produce enough heat from the feed that they typically get. So at minus 30 and minus 40, the good condition cows are going to need an extra 2 to 4 pounds of grain, depending on the temperature. And the same goes for the thin cows, but you're adding that extra 2 pounds at minus 30 and 4 pounds at minus 40, along with, in addition to the 2.8 pounds they need in total. So here, just for cold temperature sakes, let's call it 3 pounds at 12 cents. That's roughly 30 to 35 cents a day difference in feed costs when that cow's thin going into the cool temperatures. Feed intake during pregnancy, typically between 2.25% and 2.5% of body weight. So if you're feeding just straight forages, 35 pounds of hay or 85 pounds of silage is about right. And as the fetus grows, the digestive organs, the space for the digestive organs is reduced, and this can reduce feed intake. The other thing that'll limit feed intake, fiber levels, NDF over 60%, and also if you have more than 50% water in the total ration, that potentially can reduce the amount of feed that they consume. They're filling up on water rather than dry feed, but that's more common in dairy cows than beef, but just something to watch out for. Calf development. At the different stages of pregnancy, you can see even at 5 months of age, it's no bigger than a large cat. So that last trimester is critically important that the nutrition is proper, so that that calf can put on 75 pounds of weight. That could be 60 pounds or more over those last 3 months. And the placenta and all the fluids that are being developed in that pregnant cow, the placenta is developed by week 12 and is in full size by week 34. So it's not only the growth of the calf, you need the fluids and the placentas to be developed at the same time. So if you're underfeeding your cows during early pregnancy, it does impact the development of the fetus. When you've got cows on fresh pasture, good green grass, generally there's more than enough amounts of protein and energy. But as the summer goes along, the total concentration of minerals, calcium and phosphorus, will change as that forage matures, and trace minerals are typically deficient in most of the province. Now, with you being short of energy and protein, if you're calving out January, February, March, and you're feeding them before they get out on pasture, a shortage of protein and energy can cause a change in how that calf will react to long-term nutrition. It's called imprinting, and it can reduce the metabolic function of the calf and predispose them to cardiovascular, metabolic, and endocrine diseases. If you're reducing or with the reduced nutrition on the cow, she's not going to be able to produce as much milk. Therefore, you could potentially have a 30 kilogram reduction in weaning weight. Now, early on in the after calving, when that cow is milking at a peak performance, that young calf, if it can consume 7 pounds of milk, it will result in a pound of gain on that newborn calf. So a couple rations that you can consider: late pregnancy ration for the cows, hay, straw, grain. Some people want to use an ionophore such as Rumensin and Bovatec, which will prevent coccidiosis and also improve digestion efficiency. If you want to go with a silage and straw ration, 15-20% straw in late pregnancy is possible, depending on the quality of the feed. And if you're looking at just a straight alfalfa grass hay, 35 pounds. These are suggestions based on average feed quality. Having the feed tested will definitely make a big difference on what you're able to do. After calving, 65 pounds of oat silage, 12 pounds of grain, or you can go 35 pounds of grass hay and 6 pounds of barley. If you're using oats instead of barley, you're going to need 10% more by weight, because oats is typically 10% less in energy and 10% less in protein. That's the traditional oat varieties. If you're feeding the SO1 or the Nasser oat, what they call a brown oat with a high fat content, the energy density between the two grains is identical. So you don't have to make that adjustment for energy density. Force feeding mineral versus free choice consumption. If you can, try to do it on a forced feeding situation. Rob Hand did some work back in 1996 in the Barhead Westlock area, where he checked to see how often the cows come in for mineral and how much do they eat. They had the tub on a scale and the RFID reader so they could tell which cow was eating how much. And you can see that, the cows will come for mineral every 4 to 5 days. Calves a little bit more often, but the big thing here is consumption can vary from 1 to 774 grams, which is roughly 1.6 pounds a day. Even the calves, 1,140 grams a day. That's 2.5 pounds. It's not good for them to get that much all at one time. But if it's a taste that they like, they'll go ahead and take what they want because there's no limitation. So if you want to do something a little bit different, or if you are still using the free choice methods, loose product is consumed 25% higher than the block, more so in the wintertime than the summer. Cows don't sleep through the night. They get up, they walk around, they look for something to do. And what Nebraska researchers found out is that 75% of salt and mineral consumption occurs at night. Couple guidelines: 100 cows should consume a bag of salt per week. And with these minerals now that have 100-gram recommended intake, 250 cows should consume a bag of mineral per day. You don't want to put out various combinations, mineral in one place, salt in another, or throw out a salt block someplace else. If you are mixing the salt and mineral together, what you want is to have one type of mineral salt combination together. You can feed it at 3 or 4 different locations, but it should be the same at all of them. Cows have a craving for salt. They don't crave mineral. They don't have the ability to know what they really need. So if we're looking at a green feed straw, a green feed or a straw grain ration, chaff piles, corn grazing, swath grazing, typically you need more calcium and magnesium than what's available in a 2-to-1 mineral. A feedlot type mineral is suitable, something that can have 20% calcium, 4% magnesium, maybe 1 or 2% of phosphorus. Those products are available from various companies. But if you have some 2-to-1 minerals sitting at home and you're not quite sure, mixing a bag of salt with a bag of the 2-to-1 mineral and 1 bag of limestone will get you very close to that 20% calcium, 4% magnesium. You want to add some extra magnesium oxide and vitamin A, D, and E, along with the extra vitamin E, because you're diluting down what you're getting in that 2-to-1 mineral to about 1/3 of what's normal. So you have to supplement more to meet the requirements. Now, this mixture, depending on what products you're using, may not be consumed by the cow at about 3.5 to 4 ounces per day. So to solve that problem, add some dried molasses to improve intake to that 0.25 to 0.4 pounds a day. And that might take, 8 or 10 pounds of dried molasses for this mix. And all you're doing is adjusting the amount of molasses so that the intake matches what the requirements are. Okay, grass hay, usually a 2-to-1 mineral is recommended. Higher calcium, may even need higher calcium in the combination, like a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 mineral, but it all depends on what comes back on the feed test. If you've got less than 25% alfalfa in your hay, a 2-to-1 mineral. Anything over about 25% alfalfa, a 1-to-1 mineral is typically suitable. Pastures with these same kind of combinations, that's a good indication of what type of mineral you should be feeding as well. Trace minerals and vitamins. In Western Canada, copper, manganese, zinc, and selenium are deficient. That's no question about that, but the deficiency can be any place from 50 to 75% of what is required. Iodine and cobalt are virtually non-existent. You need to feed either a pre-made mineral combination with the higher trace mineral levels or a fortified trace mineral salt with selenium. Blue salt, unfortunately, is not an option. There's no copper, no manganese, no zinc, and no selenium in that product. So if you have a whole bunch of blue blocks, keep them in the shed. Next fall or next winter, when you can see weather's going to get bad, put those blocks of salt up against the front of the box on the truck and leave them there. That way, when you're bucking drifts getting home from a through a snowstorm, you should have enough ballast in the back so you got traction to get home. One thing that is known is that if you change from a blue salt to a fortified trace mineral salt on pasture without changing anything else, you'll get approximately 25 pounds more gain on those calves. There's an impact on the cows, and they may even improve the reproductive performance as well. Now, anytime you're feeding hay or silage, you have to supply extra vitamins, because the vitamins in hay starts to oxidize 60 to 90 days after the hay is cut. And if it's ensiled either in bale silage, pit silage, or piles, all the vitamins are destroyed during that process. So supplementation is required. We talked a bit about selenium. I know the regulations state that 3 milligrams per day is the maximum supplemental selenium that you can provide to a cow. But over the years, my thoughts on that have changed. I would prefer to see someplace around 6 to 6.5 milligrams of selenium a day going to a pregnant cow or a lactating cow. In order to get that amount, if you're buying a custom mineral, you have to sign a customer formulation release. So you acknowledge that you're taking this feed and you understand what you're doing. The other side of the coin is vitamin E is generally limiting in some of the supplements that are out there. Vitamin E, 500,000 IUs per kilogram, the strength of the product they use in feed mills, just went up from $8 a kilo to $18.50 a kilo. So it is one of the more expensive portions of the feed. And that's why some of the companies keep the amount down to entice purchase on price only. But the thing to remember is vitamin E and selenium work as a pulley and belt system. One does not work without the other. So if you're adding the extra selenium, then you should be adding the extra amount of vitamin E. Now, injectable AD only has enough vitamin E in that product to prevent the oxidations of vitamin A and vitamin D. Injected vitamin E will stay in the circulatory system and in the body for about 5 to 7 days, and then it's excreted. So the better way to do this is to feed the vitamin A, D, and E throughout the calving season or throughout the winter period, rather than injecting at birth. And the recommended amounts there is dry cows, 300 IUs per day, lactating beef cows, 500. If you're running backgrounding lot or receiving calves in the fall, once they've been weaned and shipped to a feedlot, the first 14 days should have 1,000 IUs per day. That'll help reduce the stress and the sickness that occurs. Once the calves have settled, you can go back down to that 300 IUs per day. Using an ionophore, such as Bobatec or Rumensin, can improve digestive efficiency by that 5 to 7%. If you're on a high grain ration, it'll help maintain a constant rumen function. Bobatec is registered for use, free choice on pasture. The regulations are just being changed right now to make it easier to get it into your own formulation rather than just the ones that have been registered. Rumensin cannot. If you get an animal over-consuming rumensin, it will reduce their feed intake. Now, the caution with both of these products, actually, rumensin is more noted for it, but if a dog or a horse gets into this type of feed, even in a grain mix, they can kill the horse and the dog. Right now, if you're looking at cost return with the high price of grain, you'll get roughly $4 return for every dollar invested. So it's something to consider. And the nicest thing about it is putting it into a supplement or a pellet, you don't have to fight and mix it out of a mineral. It's all done, one product, put it in the mixer, and away you go. Protein is something that is critical for cattle performance. And about 80% of the protein that is consumed by the animal, depending on stage of production, is generally degraded or digested by the bacteria that are in the rumen and the front stomachs. Now, what happens then is some of these bacteria only have a lifespan of roughly 20 minutes. So the feed protein is then, part of it is used by these microbes to generate the next population, and you get a good portion of microbial protein going down into the lower digestive system. But if you don't have that 9% protein in a late pregnancy cow, one of the first symptoms that you'll see is the manure will not be a nice flat pat or a pie. It'll tend to be pyramided and vertical in shape. That tells me that the fibers are not being digested efficiently, and those cows are not eating as much as they should be. So with that lack of protein, you cannot get a proper digestion rate on the fibers in the feeds. And with that fiber staying in the rumen and the forestomachs for a longer period of time, what that does is it reduces the total feed intake the next day and the next day and the next day. So it's a negative feedback loop, because if you're short of protein and have a reduced feed intake, that further reduces the feed intake, reducing the protein consumption, which again multiplies the effect in reducing feed intake until they actually impact or go down. So it's something to watch for, and for me, the easiest way to get an indication if your protein levels are adequate, as long as you're not feeding a whole bunch of grain and you got acidosis, looking at the manure is a great way to take your first step. I know that there's a lot of people that use protein lick tubs or blocks. They are a product that should be considered if you've got no other way to supplement cattle. So if you're out on a large grazing lease or an area where you can't get supplemental feed to the cows, I do recommend the blocks or the tubs to bring the protein levels up, just because of what we talked about in the previous slide. But I have a few concerns. These tubs and blocks, they're designed to be fed at a certain amount, and you'll get the same variable intake with the lick tub or block free choice as you will with a trace with a salt or mineral combination on pasture. What is each animal getting compared to the group average? There's no way to know. Cost, it depends on what animals you're feeding and what product you're providing and how that product has been made. Some of them are very hard and intakes are right about where they should be. Others are a little bit softer, maybe having a little bit more molasses or a little more water in it, and they can easily overconsume. So it's difficult to know what each animal is actually receiving. You can calculate out the average amount by group of animals, but it is tough otherwise. So what are you getting out of these blocks and tubs? I just took a label that I had on file here, and you can see this one was a 22% protein tub. The big thing with that is, in order for a tub or a block to be registered, the nutrient concentrations need to be within a 5% variation from the first tub that is poured to the last one. So when CFIA receives documentation to register something like this, they take 20 to 30 samples during that pour and test for something, and usually it's the salt content. It's the cheapest and easiest to measure. And if they don't have that proper concentration, they don't get the registration. So that's the reason that you typically have very low calcium and phosphorus levels in these products. Both of them are very difficult to keep in suspension. Trace minerals generally are pretty reasonable. So with this product, they're recommending a pound a day or 454 gram intake. Now, this is not one of the cheaper products. The price on that, if the animal is eating a pound per day, that worked out to $1.44 per head. Right now, with winter feeding programs, a lot of the rations I'm building are between $2.25 and $2.50 a day. So it's a fairly big chunk of money to put out for these products. And for a lactating, like this is for a cow out on pasture late season. They haven't been weaned yet. So she's still lactating and probably someplace in that 4, maybe 5 months pregnant range. You can see it provides 12% of the protein, reasonable amount of calcium and phosphorus, manganese or magnesium, copper, manganese, and zinc. Pretty reasonable, but you should be able to supplement with a complete package, including the vitamins, for any place between 15 and 20 cents a day. So there's a lot of money to be either be made or lost by using these tubs. There are places where they should be used. I'm not disputing that, but if the animals are close to home, or if you are feeding silage or some grain, there's definitely cheaper methods to do the job properly. That's a duplicate slide. I apologize. Urea supplementation. If you're looking at a 32% supplement, all natural, for calves that are under 450 pounds, you need to do that because the calves do not have the ability to utilize the urea or non-protein nitrogen. In any of these rations, you need to have a minimum of 0.15% sulfur in the ration so that they can synthesize the amino acids that are needed, especially the 4 that contain sulfur. The other thing that's needed with the urea supplement is you need a minimum of 2, preferred 3 pounds of grain a day to provide soluble carbohydrate to the animals. If you don't have that soluble carbohydrate, that nitrogen, some of it will it's eventually converted right down to straight nitrogen. And if you don't have that carbohydrate there, some of it might be lost no differently than if you were feeding a nitrate feed. You don't want to exceed 25% of the total protein from the non-protein nitrogen source. Another way to look at it is if your cow needs 11% protein during lactation, no more than about 2.6 to 2.7% of that total protein can come from urea. And the big thing is watch the body condition. If something's not quite right, those cows will start dropping weight and be thin in a very short period of time. The other thing to watch for with urea supplementation is the manure. You don't want to go from 0 urea to full rate at one shot. Those bacteria have to adjust. So for 2 or 3 days, feed 1/3 of the urea supplement that's required. Watch the manure. If it looks normal, after 2 or 3 days, go ahead and go up to 2/3. Again, after 3 or 4 days, if it looks normal, then you can go up to the full rate. That shock of going from 0 to 100% could throw them off feed and result in a lot of loose manure behind those animals. The other thing that comes into play with feeding cows is body condition. And this is something where you evaluate the amount of fat that covers the short ribs in the loin area. You've got 4 short ribs that stick out off the right-hand side of the animal. And what you're doing is measuring the amount of fat that you have between the ribs and then over the sharp end of the ribs. The sharper it feels, the less body condition they have, less fat that they're carrying. So it's a good way to evaluate your feeding programs. You're always looking at the right side of the animal when you're at the back, because on the left-hand side is where the rumen is, and you're going to get a false reading of how much flesh there is over those short ribs. So condition score 2 is an animal that is thin, probably 200 pounds lighter than what they should be. On the pin bones and the short ribs and on the backbone, you can see these bones sticking out or protruding. There's not much tissue or muscle over these bones. And the short ribs themselves are very sharp and very easy to see. You really don't even need to look at, or put your hands on the animal if the hair coat is short, but it's amazing how much the hair coat can fool you, especially with winter conditions. So picture there is some animals that were pretty scabby shape. You can see that the pin bones, the hip bones are showing up pretty severely. Now, body condition score 3 or is the place where you want to be. Cows going into winter, cows being just before calving. There's enough flesh on that animal that it will help keep the animal warm. The extra energy and muscle available could potentially help with the delivery of the calf. But again, keeping that animal in that 3 to 3.5 range for body condition score is prime. That's where you want it to be. So how does body condition score influence management? If you know your cows are thin, build up the cow condition when feed is cheap before the cold weather hits, because an animal will be able to gain more weight when it's warm compared to when it's dry. If you are a little bit short of feed, there are times of the year where you can harvest a bit of that body condition score, but the big thing is you have to replace it before calving season starts. If they are in good shape, if you want to go to skip a day feeding, or if you want to feed 2 days worth of silage in a bunk feeder and only feed them once every 2 days, that is no problem. If you find that your cows are getting over fat, cut the ration with amount of straw so that they reduce the quality of the ration. And it's a great way to reduce your feeding costs. You need to monitor your cow condition, especially after a cold period like we had there for about 2 to 2.5 weeks. A cow can drop 100 pounds in 2 weeks if she's not fed right, a little bit thin, and in cold, windy conditions. So late pregnancy nutrition. The one thing that really makes a big difference on calf survival, calf health, is colostrum development. Colostrum's formed 4 to 6 weeks prior to calving. So that refers back to my comment that if you're feeding them right, you'll have the high quality colostrum. You need to supplement the vitamin E and selenium to the cow well before that calf is born. It probably takes 2 months as well. If your cow has been deficient in vitamin E, selenium, and trace minerals, it'll take her roughly 2 months to get her concentrations up to where it needs to be. And then, yes, you will be getting some supplementation to the calf all along, but in order to get full supplementation to the calf, that cow has to be running on high octane trace minerals and vitamins and selenium. Now, the vitamin E and selenium injection at birth, it may be necessary for a calf that's not able to get up or are having some difficulties after birth or white muscle problems, but that vitamin E will be gone within 3 or 4 days, whereas the vitamin E that's passed on in the colostrum will stay with that calf for a very, very long period of time. So I'm talking about long-term, short-term and long-term immunity on that calf. The Canadian system of body condition scoring works from a value of 1 to 5, whereas the US is a score of 9. So when this report came out from the US, The number 6 on that slide is equal to a condition score 3 that I've been talking about. And you can see that a cow that's 200 pounds lighter at calving versus in good condition, she's only giving half of the short-term immunity, or the IgM, that's there. So in that situation, that's when you get the calf scours. That's where you get the snotty-nosed calves or sick calves 2, 3, 4, 5 days after calving. The IgG, or long-term immunity, not quite as greatly impacted by the colostrum quality and quantity, but that's when, if you're having troubles with illnesses in your calves 3, 4, 5 months after calving, that's where the long-term immunity comes in. Keeping that cow in good condition or maintaining her energy intake in that last 90 days of pregnancy is key. 60%, 70% of that calf birth weight is going to occur during that last trimester, but it also impacts the ability of that cow to have proper muscle tone and ability to deliver that calf. So what Bellows did was he split a group of cows and heifers into 2 groups. One group was getting about 3 pounds of grain a day for that last trimester, compared to those that were not. You can see that there was really no difference in calf birth weight for those between the heifers and the cows with the extra grain. 95% of the calf birth weight is determined by the bull in the breeding season. So you can see 4, 5, 6 pounds difference in total birth weight if those animals are well fed or maybe even a little bit overfed. 5.8% pull or assist score percent of the calves needed to be pulled, and they weren't that hard of a pull. They're just a 2. Now, on the other hand, when no grain was fed to these groups of animals, to the group of cows and heifers, the heifers couldn't push in and get as much feed. They also are growing themselves. While they're pregnant, they'll be at 85% of mature body weight when they deliver their first calf. But to me, the big one that stands out is 60% of the calves needed an assist to be born. Again, not hard pulls, but without that proper muscle tone and ability to push that calf out, there were a lot more calves needing help to come out. Body condition score also impacts milk yield. The red line is when maximum feed intake occurs in an animal, roughly 12 weeks after calving. The peak lactation occurs 8 weeks after calving. So if you don't have the fat to make up the difference in energy requirement in those rations, and it's difficult for cows, their feed intake is reduced for the first 12 weeks. They can't eat as much. They have to rely on mobilizing some of the fat to make up that energy deficiency if it's there. And when they are able to take 1 pound of fat off their back, that's enough energy to produce 7 pounds of milk. So that'll give you your high peak lactation. And over the entire lactation, you can see that the amount of milk that they're producing is reduced by about 4% per month. If you have a lower peak lactation, it just doesn't flatten out and carry on. You lose that amount of milk production through the entire lactation. So it does make a big difference on how much that calf is going to grow. It's not only getting a healthy calf that's growing well into the herd, you also have to get those animals back into calf. So the Bellows and Short, again out of Montana, they used body condition score and scared them thin, moderate, or good condition. And what they found is only 46% of the cows that were thin were cycling for 60 days after calving, 61% in moderate condition, and 91% were cycling 1 cycle before the bulls were turned out. Now, when you get a cow cycling before the bulls are turned out, her first service conception rate goes up by 20%. So that bull doesn't have to work as hard, and you can expect a higher number of calves to be born in that first 21 days of the calving season. So those thin cows, 2/3 of them didn't even start cycling when the bulls were turned in. Moderates, they moved up 30% to 92, but the good condition cows, they were all cycling by the time the bulls were put in. And that really improves not only the calving profile, but for every calf that is born 21 days earlier, if it's gaining 2 pounds a day, that's 40 pounds on the calf when it's sold at $2 a pound. That's another $80 a calf. So it makes a big difference. Dr. Berg and McElroy back in the 60s conducted the experiment where they were watching how weight loss or weight gain between calving and the turnout of the bulls influenced reproductive efficiency. And in 64, 65, where those cows lost a lot of weight between calving and bull turnout, calving rate the following year dropped by another 15%. 65, 66, they fed those animals modestly, so they only had about a 9-pound increase in weight gain. But you can see even that slight weight gain was enough to maintain that 90 to 93% calving rate or conception rate. So it doesn't take much. It's not that you have to get them over fat before the bulls are turned in. And even slight weight loss, 66, 67, 25 pounds of weight loss, it's something that doesn't show up in the eye, but that costs 20% of the calves. So nutrition does play a big part in how the animals function and perform, but even just small changes make a big difference. The bottom line, again, this is the American study, and what they did was put it in relative terms. Anything with a body condition score of 6 to 6.5, you can expect 90 to 97% calf crop, as long as nothing goes wrong with the bull, no infectious diseases or other problems that occur. Now, developing the replacement heifer, a little bit different than feeding steers in a feedlot, and there's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at the replacement heifer. First thing is at puberty, the mammary tissue or the udder develops 4 times faster than any other tissue in the body. If you're feeding these animals too much energy, too much grain, the udder fills up with fat, not milk secreting tissue, and that becomes a problem for the entire life of that heifer. So if you're wondering how can you tell, some people say follow the bloodlines if you possibly can. If the mother's a good milker, the daughter's a poor milker, the granddaughter's a good milker, and just follow that through the generations, that's a good indicator that you're overfeeding your heifers. Now, if you're developing the replacement heifer, you want to get them at the optimum weight before breeding season hits. Now, again, another Montana study back in 1988. These numbers look awfully low, but at that time, their mature cow weight was any place from 950 to 1,000 pounds. So we got to extrapolate to the 1,400, 1,500 pound cow we've got now. So what they did was they just gate ran a whole bunch of heifers into a pen, the heavies and the lights. They wanted to get the animals predicted gain of 1.4 pounds a day overall. And you can see that the light heifers didn't get us into the feed bunk as much. Their weight gain was down, and the amount of gain per day was also down. But when they fed the 2 different groups separately, they split out the lighter calves. They wanted a final weight of 675 pounds. And by feeding them separately and adjusting the rations accordingly, they came very, very close to their targeted gain. Now, for me, a replacement heifer should be gaining at roughly 1.75 pounds a day, 1.5 to 1.75 pounds a day. If you've got some large exotic crosses, the Simmentals and the Charolais that are 1,800-pound animals, you're going to have to go up to 2 pounds a day gain on those heifers. But try to keep it below that 1.75 for the Angus crosses and a lot of the British Continental cross cattle. The other thing that they found by taking these heifers that were fed separately or fed together is the age of puberty on the ones that were light was 20 days longer, and they had a 30% lower, 30% of the animals were not cycling at the start of the breeding season. And those that were fed separately, only about a 10-day differential in age of puberty, a 20% improvement at those cycling at the start of the breeding season, and that related to a 20% higher calf crop the next year. I'm not endorsing any product or poo-pooing any product, but I thought it might be interesting to see how things need to be considered when you are choosing a product. And the first thing that came to mind to me, and discussion with a few people last week, is a lot of them are asking, do we need to have a chelate or a proteinate or a complex form of trace minerals that are available from various suppliers? Their claims are you've got a higher bioavailability to the animal, and your bioavailability that's cited from a research paper is good for that system or situation, age of the animal, environmental conditions, rate of gain, health status. What are you expecting these animals to do? Those will all influence the bioavailability of a trace mineral. Now, talking to some of these guys, they said that some of these chelated or proteinated or complex minerals, the cost is 5 times higher than in inorganic mineral. So it does get expensive, and in most of the products, only 20 to 30% of the trace minerals for copper, manganese, zinc will be chelated. You can get cobalt as well, but those are the 3 big ones. And I wish we could do this in person. You've got 2 different products sitting on the shelf at your supply store or feed mill. One's a 2-to-1 mineral, and then you've got a 1-to-1 mineral. Which is the better product to buy? And this is where we'd usually get people to put up their hands and vote on which one is best. And unfortunately, we can't do that right now. But the answer to this question is, it all depends on the ration. If you're feeding a green feed or a hay or a straw or a swath grazing or cereal silage, a 2-to-1 is the preferred product. In some situations, like I mentioned before, you might need a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 calcium to phosphorus ratio. So a 20% calcium, 4% phosphorus is possible in that situation. For the alfalfa hays and legumes, or if you're caught in a situation where you had a hailstorm and you're caught a whole bunch of canola green feed for silage or for green feed, or if you're using cocktail mixes for swath grazing or annual grazing, again, a 1-to-1 mineral is probably appropriate because all of these feeds are typically high in calcium. Now, what are you actually getting out of these products? The big thing is, what's your intake versus the multiply that by your concentration. So with a 50-gram intake, 16% calcium, you get 8 grams of calcium out of that's being supplied. Phosphorus 4, a 1-to-1 makes good sense. It's all equal amounts. The big difference here is, even though I'm going to go back here, you can see 3,000 copper in this product versus 2,000 in that one, 10,000 versus 6,500. Oh, one too many. You can see that the amounts of copper between the two is exactly the same going into the animal, because one's at 50, it had a higher concentration, no doubt about that, but they're only eating 50 grams. The one with the lower concentration, they're eating a little bit more and they're getting the same amount of supplementation. So it's not just what's on the label. You got to calculate out what are they actually going to get out of the mineral. This product is being sold in Canada. It's something that is being promoted as a 100% trace mineral replacement. You don't have to feed your trace mineral salts. All you need is a block of white or blue salt, and everything's fine. And what they're recommending is for that 500-pound calf, it needs 2 doses per year. 10 mils per year is what they're actually going to get. And these prices might be a little bit off, but that would be $5.50 a head. The replacement heifer, 4 doses at 6.3 mils, $13. So what is actually in this magical product? Copper's only at 15 milligrams per mil, manganese at 10, zinc at 60, and selenium at 5. So if you look at that 500-pound calf, they're saying that if you give them that 10 mils, it'll be getting 150 milligrams per year out of this product. And that's supposed to do the trick on what you actually are getting out of your supplementation program. You don't need anything else. That's their claim. I strongly disagree. Going out of cow bites, the 500-pound calf needs roughly 55 milligrams of copper per day. If you divide the amount of copper supplied by those 2 injections over a year's period, it's only getting half a milligram, just under half a milligram a day. Manganese, a 1/4 milligram per day versus 207 required. Granted, you'll get about half of what you're going to need for copper, manganese, and zinc from the feed and grain, but nowhere near what that animal requires. So if I was looking at this for the cost and what they're promising, it's something that I think the Pinocchio syndrome comes into play here. So in conclusion, to properly feed a herd of animals, for the developmental side of things, feed tests, water quality analysis, are key. Watch the animal body condition. What's the health status? What stage of production? All need to be considered when you're developing a ration. We saw in February how weather can change very dramatically over a short period of time. You can't just leave the cows out there to fend for themselves, or the feeder calves to fend for themselves. You need to adjust the management and the feeding programs so that you do continue to meet the animal's requirements. I find it's very difficult to look at animals over 3 or 4 months and not see a gradual change. That's just the nature of the beast. The eye doesn't see it. So if you've got a good neighbor or somebody that you can have coming in once a month or periodically, buy him a cup of coffee and a piece of pie, and then take him out to the pens and have him look at the cows. His eye hasn't seen those animals for a while, and he'll probably spot some stuff that you may not have. Big thing is, ask if help is needed. It's not one person that helps create a successful situation. Number one is the producer. He's controlling the reins. He's the one that makes the final decision. But in a situation like this, involve a veterinarian, involve a nutritionist. You know, you've all got to have that client veterinarian relationship. And I think a lot more of them would like to work with you on a preventative measure rather than coming out and pulling calves or doing C-sections. So it's a team approach, and it generally works out reasonably well. With that, If anybody's interested to talk with me, Khalil's got a great program through Erica, where if you talk to him first and are needing some assistance, he will pass your name and phone number over to me, and I will get in touch with you at no cost. If you want to go a little bit deeper and into the development of a annual program or even ration balancing, it's something I can do. My contact information is there. So with that, Khalil, do we have any questions?
No, not yet. Yeah, we got our first question.
Okay.
How much can we expect old feed to deteriorate per year? Green feed and hay.
Sorry, I missed that one.
Okay, I can repeat it for you.
Please.
Yeah, not a problem. How much can we expect old feed to deteriorate per year?
Oh, great question.
Yeah.
Um, as I mentioned earlier, your vitamins basically are going to be non-existent in that 2-year-old hay. Protein contents can drop 2 to 3, maybe 4%. So if you had 16 last year, it may be 12 or even lower this year. Digestibility drops by 10%. Intake drops by 10%. And energy content, again, will be dropping any place from 10 to 20% as well. So if you do have 2-year-old hay, definitely retest it before you feed it in the second year. Bale weight will also drop by 10 to 15%. So if you're buying 2-year-old hay when it's a good deal, have those bales reweighed, or at least a representative load weighed over the scale. And those bales could be 100 to 150 pounds lighter than what they were when they were made.
And how about green feed?
You can expect the same losses in green feed.
Okay. Any other question, please?
While we're waiting, one of the things that I've noticed when people have a problem with a bull, it's either limps or goes lame just before the breeding season, and they're short that one bull, they'll throw it back into the mix and hope he does his job. If the foot is healthy, he will mount, he will do his job, but the fever that occurs during the infection of that foot basically destroys all the active sperm, and it can take up to 4 to 6 weeks for that bull to become fertile again. So if you do have a problem with an animal going lame or something has a fever, take that bull out and find a replacement, because the last thing you need is one bull to be a dud and not service the cows and get them pregnant.
We still have so many people on call. I'm waiting for questions. If somebody wants to speak, just type in. I can allow you to speak as well if you want.
I guess I put 90% of the people asleep during the presentation. There's no questions. Well, if people are shy, Leo, they've got my email address up there. Or if they want to talk to you and redirect the question to me over the next little while, be more than happy to take questions then.